Hello, everyone, and welcome to Just DAO It, the podcast for people starting DAOs. Our guest is having a little bit of a technical difficulty, so he will be back shortly, but I thought I'd get started with the intro in the meantime. Thanks for joining, as always. My name is Adam Miller, and I am the CEO and co-founder of MoonDAO, which provides legal entity solutions for people starting DAOs. Maybe I'll do the MoonDAO ad now instead of later, which is just to say that we love talking to not only DAOs and Web3 projects in general about the benefits of legal entities, and in particular, a legal entity in the Marshall Islands. But if you're a lawyer or a service provider that's also servicing DAOs and Web3, please reach out, because we always have people asking us for introductions to good Web3 lawyers, DAO lawyers, other service providers who can help DAOs and Web3 with different things. So we'd love to add you to our network of people that we can introduce DAOs and Web3 projects to if they have a need that you can help solve. So please do check us out on mydao.org. Before I started MoonDAO, I did consulting for people starting and operating DAOs. For those of you who are regular listeners or watchers, you know how passionate I am about DAOs and Web3 in general, and just so excited about the opportunity for DAOs to change the way we organize everything on Earth and beyond, from the way we do organizations, governments, everything in between. Really exciting. I'm going to an event, by the way, in a few weeks in Prospera, which is a new kind of network state-like city, kind of a modern crypto city in Honduras, in the Caribbean. It's an island off the coast of Honduras called Zoatan, I believe. And if you're interested in that, just Google Crypto Futures and Legal Engineering Summit. So it's going to be all about legal engineering, writing laws, writing regulations, legal issues for DAOs and Web3, and would love to see some of you there if you are interested. So on this week's episode, once he gets back from his restarting of his computer, we're going to have a man named Pablo. And Pablo is the founder of Moon DAO. So you'll hear a lot more about it later. But Moon DAO has already it's a DAO. They've sent people into space. And they're planning, and my understanding is they're planning on colonizing the moon, so that the moon is not colonized only by private companies and existing nation states. So instead of the moon being owned by the United States, Russia, and SpaceX or something like that, hopefully we can have a DAO governing the moon or much of it. And I think that's a really awesome mission. Moon DAO is a Marshall Islands DAO LLC. So obviously we love supporting DAOs that are Marshall Islands registered. As always, we're going to start the show with the Just DAO It News Report, where we go through several recent articles and tweets that we think are relevant for people starting and operating DAOs. And Pablo and I will share our reactions to these stories. So what do we agree with, disagree with? What do we think is relevant for people who are starting DAOs about all these different stories? So I'm going to jump right into the first story of the week while we wait for Pablo, so we don't keep all of our listeners waiting. And briefly, just going to check the Telegram chat in case there's any word. Nope. All right, so let's dive right into the Just DAO It News Report. And once Pablo gets back, we'll get him doing a brief intro, and then we'll get him commenting on these stories as well. The first story of the week is from actually a biopharma a press release site. It's called Biopharma Dive. So I love when we see stories about DAOs coming from outside of the kind of Web3 native ecosystem. And this one is an announcement announcing Pfizer-backed DAO launches community-funded biotech firm. The biotech firm aims to revolutionize treatments for cancer and aging-related diseases, leveraging research into naked mole rats. So this is about a DAO called VitaDAO, similar to MoonDAO, again, who you'll meet Pablo from MoonDAO soon. VitaDAO is a DAO that is achieving real success. They raise money not only from their members, but also from Pfizer. So Pfizer, I believe, made a grant, possibly in exchange for some governance rights. And now the DAO is working on spinning out biotech companies that are achieving, trying to achieve things that perhaps would not have been achieved if not for VitaDAO. So VitaDAO is focused on longevity research. So this company, Matrix Biosciences, is going to work on vitality and longevity research. So trying to help people live longer and eventually live forever. So really exciting again to see Vita DAO having some success. DAOs like this are also good DAOs to check out if you're new to the world of DAOs. Because they're already fairly established. And so if you're thinking about, hey, how do I start my own DAO and what are some of the challenges I might run into and what are some ways people are already solving those challenges, checking out a DAO like Vita DAO can be a good choice. So just going to check in on Pablo real quick again. See if he's close. And meanwhile, I will turn to the second news story of the week. This is a really interesting one. So this article is from Cointelegraph, and the headline is, Barnbridge DAO votes to comply with SEC order. The voting ended with a unanimous decision to comply with the SEC's potential demands and pay fines if necessary. So the voting ended just a few days ago, and I think there's two interesting things going on here. So the first is that the SEC has announced that it may be going after this DAO called Barnbridge. And I won't get too much into what they're accused of. Here's Pablo. Let me grab him up on the stage here. Hey, Pablo.
Hey, how's it going? Sorry about that.
Going good.
I had to restart my computer and then switch over to the laptop, kind of like switch to my other web. Sorry about that.
That's the world we live in. I'm glad you made it. So I just shared the first news story of the week, but let's just take one step back. And Pablo, why don't you tell the audience just a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and in particular, what makes you an authority on DAOs? And then we'll jump back into the news segment.
Sure. So I've been involved in DAOs since late 2020, and I've been a part of a few DAO movements, I suppose. So probably the one that people have heard of the most is ConstitutionDAO, where it was about within 1 week we raised nearly $50 million to buy a copy of the U.S. Constitution from Sotheby's. And then I founded another DAO called Moon DAO, which was an internet movement to send someone to space. So we raised about 2,600 ETH to send someone to space, and we were able to buy 2 tickets to send someone to suborbit with Blue Origin. So I've been around the block with DAOs a little bit, and yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. And I told the audience, and tell me if this is right, that part of MoonDAO's mission is to make sure that the moon is not colonized only by SpaceX and the United States and Russia or whoever the major actors will be, but that we have some kind of decentralized governance over what is sure to be a massive part of human life in the future, the moon.
Yeah, totally. I think the moon should be owned by the internet. It makes sense. I think that most countries in the world don't have a space program, and most people, it doesn't matter what nation you're from or what part of the world you're from, are incredibly inspired by this sort of next step that we're taking to become multiplanetary. So I think we should take everyone for the ride. It doesn't matter what country you're from. You should be able to get involved in the conversation and the engineering in becoming multiplanetary. It shouldn't just be monopolized by one country.
Yeah, that's awesome. And meanwhile, we'll send people into space, which is very cool. So I shared the first story of the week just before you got here, but let's dive into the second story. And Pablo, what I'll look from you and from me is to kind of pick apart these stories for people who are starting DAOs today. What's relevant? What can they learn from these stories, etc. So the second story that I was just getting into, I'll read the headline again. This is from Cointelegraph, and the headline is, Barnbridge DAO votes to comply with SEC order. The voting ended with a unanimous decision to comply with the SEC's potential demands and pay fines if necessary. So not wanting to get too much into the specifics of the SEC case, unless you would like to, I think what's really interesting here is, often people ask us at MoonDAO, so let's say they're setting up a legal entity for their DAO, and they're wondering, like, well, what if a government agency or a court says that we have to pay a fine? and we disagree. Does having this legal entity put us at greater risk? Like, does it somehow centralize us or allow the government to force us to give up our money? And interestingly, the answer is kind of no, because if the DAO controls its money on chain, so if you really need a vote of the DAO to spend money from the DAO's treasury, right, cryptographically, then it doesn't matter if the FBI says, send us your money, the DAO has to vote to approve the sending of the money. Now, I think in most cases, a DAO probably will approve these things because I think most DAOs are trying to be good law-abiding citizens. They're not trying to live outside the scope of the law. But I think it actually gives DAOs comfort that for the money you're actually holding on chain, maybe this is a given to people who are familiar with crypto. No government can force you to give up your money. You have to vote to approve the transaction just like any other. So I think that's cool. Now, it can be a little bit different. Let's say a DAO has a multi-sig, or even a person holding their money, then of course all the FBI has to do is get those multi-sig signers or the one person to agree to send the money, even if they don't have the DAO's permission. But this is where, I think one of the really important things for people to think about when they're joining a DAO is how is the money actually controlled, right? Is it direct cryptographic voting on chain from the whole DAO? Is there a multi-sig, or where is the money sitting? What do you think about this, Pablo?
Yeah, I mean, I think my first impression of stuff like this is like I feel a little bit sad that there does exist like a bit of an adversarial relationship between the SEC and DAOs in general, because I think that there's just a lot of good that is coming from these organizations. And I liked how Eric Voorhees spoke about this. He recently had this big speech that people should look it up. It's great, but that a lot of the markets that are being created through DAOs and smart contracts are much more ordered. They actually have much more consistent enforcement of rules. And I think viewed through that lens, a lot of these DAOs actually have much stronger enforcement on chain than any government could ever aspire to. So.
It's a good point. So, I mean, one of the things that's valuable about Web3 in general is we can create markets with rules that cannot be broken, right? And so it is interesting when you have, like, let's say we're talking about a DeFi protocol that, consenting adults are deciding to use, and it has its rules enshrined in code in advance. And the SEC is coming in and saying, well, this is too risky. This goes against our rules, so we're gonna try to stop you from doing it. Well, the SEC's job is partly supposed to be to protect investors. What is better protection than having rules enforced by code on a blockchain that you would agree to in advance and then are automatically enforced? So there is something kind of ironic about how the SEC and other institutions are trying to kind of protect us from ourselves, when the whole point of what we're doing is to create systems that people can't break the rules in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of funny, if you phrase it like that. It's like we're trying to become better arbiters of the truth and and have better enforcement on chain than any of these institutions. But this sort of almost like paternalistic view of the government to approve of what consenting adults want to do is. I don't know. It feels like they're kind of treating the constituents like children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, it may be worth mentioning, in this case, this DAO was actually creating a token, which is a financial, I think easily to argue it's a financial product. It was a way of getting exposure to different tokens. So a lot of the cases that we see are the SEC or other regulators going after DAOs that are offering a securities product. So right or wrong, the risk, I think, is not as high if you're a DAO that's either sending people into space or saving the Amazon, because your product is not a financial product. But nonetheless, I think we all know that there's a lot of risks from regulators today.
Yeah, I think that the real value, and I think this is something that the whole entire ecosystem could do better, is in explaining some of these, like the stuff that is in a smart contract is great because it's transparent and anyone can see exactly what the rules are on chain. However, it is more intelligible to developers. So I'm a developer. It makes sense to me. I'm looking at this. This makes more sense than any law ever could. But your average person might that interpretability of contracts. I think that sort of user interface is sort of catching up to the Solidity developers. So yeah.
Yep, totally. All right. The next article of the week is from a website called DL News, and the headline is Doxing Allegations Surrounding $35 million Optimism Grant Sparks DAO Debate. The dust-up may test the definition of what constitutes doxing. The controversial proposal roils the optimism community. All right, and I'll just read a little bit more. The decentralized autonomous organization governing the Optimism blockchain, also known as the Token House, is proposing to suspend a grant recipient based on allegations of intentional doxing. So this story is a little bit convoluted, and there's some drama, I think, going on. And I'll share what's happening here, but I think there's also a higher level issue we can discuss related to it. So at play here is one DAO member doxing another DAO member, which means basically giving the internet their personal information, name, possibly address. I'm not sure exactly what was shared here, phone number. And in this DAO, supposedly someone doxed someone else, and then the DAO is saying you shouldn't have done that, so we might take away your grant money or no longer give you a grant. There's a bigger question here that the DAO is discussing, which is kind of overall what type of doxing level is appropriate. And so, for example, should leaders, right, who are elected, and I know people think about DAOs differently. I always like to say, like, DAOs might not have management, although they can, but they do have leaders, right? Every group of people has people who are setting the tone, who are driving change, who are helping communicate the mission and vision and keeping people motivated towards that vision. You don't have to be in charge to do that, right? There's leaders at all levels, but you could also have management. You could have some kind of committee, or it could be a facilitation committee, a management committee. It could be just a team. And in all these cases, there's a question of, well, should some teams have to dox themselves? In some I think it's clearly going to be case by case, right? But in some situations, I can see why a community member might say, look, if I'm going to buy into the project, if I'm going to, let's say, buy some tokens and put my money on the table, I'd like to know that this particular team, the governance team or the legal team or whatever it is, I'd like to know that they've shared their real names with the community so that we can hold them accountable, if only socially, right? Just knowing that if they did something wrong, it would fall, the blame would go back to their name. So I think that makes a lot of sense. At the same time, there is this kind of principle in crypto in general. It's really cool that for the first time in human history, you can have people working with each other on a global scale and remain anonymous. And that is really cool. And so I guess to me, it's just more a case-by-case basis. Each DAO should probably make its own decisions about who should be doxed and who shouldn't, or who doesn't have to. I think it's an interesting thing for people to think about. What do you think, Pablo?
Yeah, this one's actually a tough one for me to grapple with sometimes. I understand why some of the founding fathers use pseudonyms, or people that are discussing dangerous ideas politically, or things that might go against the grain of the political consensus at the time. And throughout history, I mean, if you look back, there have been tons of times where the crowd is wrong in one way or another. And maybe people don't want to be burned at the stake for the ideas that they have. And so I think having the ability to remain pseudonymous is really important, especially in a space like ours, where some really big and powerful ideas are being discussed. But that being said, I've chosen to use my real name. And the reason behind that is I'd like to basically stake my reputation. And you don't know who you're dealing with online a lot of the time. So I think it's really powerful to just show your face and say, hey, I believe in this stuff, and I don't see anything wrong with what we're doing. And I think that gives a lot of legitimacy to the space, where it's me and a bunch of other people like you, Adam, we're willing to put ourselves out there and say, and it's not like we have anything to gain for having our real names out there. not trying to get famous or something, like that.
Mm.
It's like, uh, well, actually, I just think that I want to discuss this stuff out in the open, and I think
Yeah.
it's also valuable. So I think it's up to the individuals to figure out which path is right for them, but I think that we do need to preserve the ability for people to discuss things without having their own like without getting politically burned at the stake. Or
Yeah. Well, right. So, like, cancel culture, I don't know if that's a controversial term in and of itself, but that's certainly a risk, right? That when you say what you believe with your name behind it, there is always a risk that there could be, I guess, some social cost associated with that. I've been willing to say more than I would have in the past on Web3 social. Like Farcaster, I'm a big fan of Farcaster, which is a Web3 social platform. And when this Israel-Palestinian conflict broke out, I posted on it, and I even hosted like the equivalent of Twitter Spaces, which is called an Abura space on Farcaster, to discuss the issues. And I never would have done that on Twitter or X because I would have worried more that my account could be at risk. Like, and I don't have like my views are very moderate, although I guess these days being moderate can seem extreme to people at times. But I still worry that I'll say the wrong thing and upset the wrong people, or in 3 years there will be a different owner of X, and that owner will be like the opposite of me, and now they're going to come after my account. And so I feel more comfortable saying things on Farcaster. Now, that doesn't protect me from the potential social cost if people decide they want to cancel me in general, but you can't take away my account, at least my Farcaster account, right? You can't stop me from posting.
totally. Yeah. No, I think that there's something really powerful about that. Like being able to actually own your audience to some degree, and to know that you're not just going to be, removed at random. I mean, we saw that a ton before Elon, and but it's still, like, I think something that's worth discussing here too is the like political involvement in some of these social media companies. Like the stuff with the Twitter files was really eye opening, and it's wild to see
Yeah.
some of the kind of coercion behind the scenes that's occurring, or sort of like that backdoor access where certain groups can say, "Hey, silence this person. We don't
Yeah.
like what this guy's saying." So, yeah,
Yeah, I think it's a really tough one because I mean, I tend to be very much pro free speech, right? I don't, the government at least should not be censoring people for what they say, right? No matter what, because I think the risk is much larger letting the most powerful entity in any region or in the world who has a monopoly on violence, state-sponsored violence, to let them silence people is much more dangerous than, for example, X being allowed to silence people. And even in terms of what I like to build and support, I very much prefer a world of free speech because I feel like I want to know what everyone thinks. And if people really think in like violent and destructful, is that a word? Destructive? What am I trying to say? Destructive. If people think in destructive ways, I guess in crypto you can do that kind of thing, right? Like goodful or disruptful. But I want to see that, and I don't want it to be censored. It might make me really mad and upset and sad and depressed, even. But like, I think it's really important that we know what people actually think. So I tend to lean to that side, but I can also see the damage that can be done when entire like kind of social movements emerge around something that is false or damaging, or like anti-science. I'm very pro-science. I think we should generally do what the data says makes sense when it comes to medical issues or other things, but at the same time I have trouble thinking we should censor anyone. I don't know, where do you fall on that issue?
yeah, it's tough. I mean, yeah, if we look at like COVID, for example, like there were a bunch of things that we got wrong as like a society, and there were people on the fringes that were kind of warning and saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
maybe this isn't so right," and a lot of those people were silenced. And so I think you always want to maintain the ability for that sort of like counter narrative or counterculture to exist. And even if like there's sort of like um, this weird effect where if you try to silence or push one group away from a certain narrative, it doesn't make that go away. It
Yeah.
actually empowers them, because it all of a sudden it sort of reinforces those ideas, like, oh,
Yeah.
why am I being silenced for this idea? And so it kind of just backfires anyways. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I don't think you can just, silence someone, or silence an idea. I think you
Yeah.
just need to have it exist in this free marketplace of ideas and debate other
Yeah.
ideas. And through this like conversation and reasoning, usually the right stuff floats up to the top. So I actually really like community
Yeah.
notes, for example. I think that is a very interesting way of highlighting what is misinformation. And I mean, it's already been super powerful with
Hmm.
the like Israel Palestine stuff. It's very interesting to see like the content that's coming out of that, and then community notes in real time, checking that and investigating. I mean, it's wild to exist in this sort of medium where you can have citizen journalism happening in real time, and you can actually see a war develop in real time. It's like scary, it's shocking, but also like
Yeah.
I'd rather have that than a few mainstream sort of I don't know, big news outlets just like dictating what the narrative is. So
Yeah, yeah. Are you very familiar with how this community notes feature on Twitter works? Because I can't, I've seen it, but I can't say I'm really very familiar with it.
the way I understand it is that it tries to figure out people that are typically on opposite ends of an issue, and then depending like, and you can kind of rate notes and whether or not they're correct or not correct. And then it basically matches if two people that are typically on the opposite end of an issue, and this is just what I understand, I actually don't know
Hmm.
behind the scenes how it works. I wonder if the actual like code behind it is open source. That would be really
Mm.
interesting. I know
Yeah.
Elon open source the algorithm,
Mhm.
so that's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was just googling it, and even Vitalik seems to have written an article about how the community notes algorithm works. So that makes me initially feel fairly trusting towards it. But it makes sense. I mean, if you're trying to fight, if you're like people on both sides often are trying to find truth, right? And I guess that's what our belief has to be for this type of to believe this type of system will work is that more people are trying to find truth than not, and then let's go disagree about our opinions on what to do about the truth. But if we don't have any shared truth, how do you ever make progress? So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That if you could find people from both sides who say, "No, this is actually like a screen capture from a video game, not a video from Gaza," like that's gonna help all of us, find a solution. So yeah, that's really interesting. All right, let's turn to the next article of the week. And actually, this one is going to be related to the conflict and crisis in the Middle East. And this is from Coindesk, from Consensus Magazine, which is on Coindesk. And the headline is Hamas has raised millions in crypto donations, Wall Street Journal reports. But the amount is likely small compared to the volume raised in state sponsored support. So I guess this is coming from the Wall Street Journal initially. Now, at first, my thought was, oh, this is annoying. I mean, I'm sure Israel's also raising money from crypto, and like they're trying to take the people that everyone generally hates the most in that moment. This was like right after the attack, so they were like mostly the bad guys in that moment, at least, and the Wall Street Journal is coming out with a clickbaity headline. It sounds like saying, "Look, Hamas is raising money on crypto. Look how bad crypto is." So I just did a quick Google search for Israel crypto donation, and there's the same thing for Israel. They didn't even mention in this article. I think it's called Crypto Aid Israel, and you could donate crypto to Israel. But then the next day, actually, I heard from someone else that there's even more nuance to it that's even more relevant, which is there's actually evidence of Hamas months ago saying, "Stop donating crypto to us because it's too easy for authorities to track. So don't donate this way. Just find other ways to donate." And so even like the militant terrorist whatever organization said it's like crypto is not a good way to hide money, so don't send us money on crypto. And yet, unfortunately, this news came out, basically bad mouthing crypto for the fact that it's being used by organizations like this. So I love that I learned about this nuance, because I think it's fairly accurate. It's actually a lot. It's there's a parallel to what we tell people in the like legal and regulatory world. Let's say I'm talking to another government outside the Marshall Islands that's thinking about doing something similar. And they say, well, how do you get over the hurdle that people are afraid of DAOs using crypto because it could be used for money laundering and terrorist financing and other criminal activity? And the answer actually is quite to the contrary. First of all, think about a traditional company. So like a normal corporation that's registered anywhere, Marshall Islands, Delaware, doesn't matter. Once they register, that government of Delaware or the Marshall Islands or Cayman Islands or whatever has exactly zero visibility into what that organization does with its money. Zero. Whether it's cash, whether it's bank accounts, whether it's crypto, you have zero idea. On the flip side, if you have a DAO that registers and tells the government, here's our smart contract that's governing our organization, that's holding our money, now the government can track every single transaction that the DAO engages in. Even it can see who the members are and track every single one of their transactions. Now, whether that's good or not for crypto and for the world in the long run is a separate issue. But actually, there's way more transparency with crypto than there is with traditional money and digital money. So, I mean, now, unfortunately, I've got to make this argument about 100 times before it starts to stick, and still people are afraid. But it is interesting that both Hamas and I agree that actually crypto is not a great way to commit a crime.
Totally. Yeah. Like I've heard it multiple times that law enforcement actually likes when people are using crypto because they can see every single inflow and outflow. I mean, I think that our work is not completed until every government and every nonprofit are operating using these tools. And like you can see every single transaction in and out of that treasury. And if you are, donating money or you are paying taxes, you should have a right to see what is happening with that money. And right now, you just don't. So it's kind of like a black box. And so it's weird, to me that people see sort of crypto as this, way to hide your money and all of that. It's like, well, maybe it's easier. It's easier to steal the money. Like, like you were saying before, it's more difficult for someone to just press a button and freeze your bank account. However, when it comes to auditability and to see actually what's happening with that money, it's unbeatable. There's nothing like it.
It's a good point. And it goes hand in hand with guaranteed compliance of any rules written on chain. Put compliance aside, just having transparency is very similar in its value, unless there's a completely anonymous system, because no one's going to, like any nonprofit that wants to say, again, let's just say save the rainforest, and people are giving them money, and then that money is going to, fund terrorists, whatever, they're not going to give money anymore. So it's almost, kind of like a natural compliance tool. Very, very, and I think especially nonprofits, right? To your point in Texas, maybe private companies are going to want to use ZK technology to keep their transactions safe, or things like Tornado Cash, right? Other mixers. I think there is a use case for keeping your financial transactions private, even if you just don't want people to know what NFT you bought last week, whatever, that's fine. But especially for nonprofits to be able to see where that money's going. We talked about this actually on last week's show, that the news is coming out about even BLM, Black Lives Matter, organizations in the US, everything from there are so many organizations with BLM in their name that big companies like Apple, and I'm trying to remember others, donated money to BLMs that aren't even related to Black Lives Matters by accident because they were in such a hurry to try to do good. But they just gave money to the wrong organization. And then you had some organizations where now you see the founders are living in these huge houses, and that's fine. I don't have any problem with, if someone did great work, you can reward them. But the people donating money had no idea that this money was spent, making the founders and organizers wealthy, as opposed to actually actually helping, solve real problems. So transparency is going to be nice.
Totally. Yeah. And that story is just all too common. It's like
Yeah.
maybe even more the norm.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. All right, the last story of the week, and then we will dive into a deeper interview with Pablo. The last story is actually a tweet from Idris, IDRISS underscore XYZ, announcing Meta Infinite Public Goods funding round powered by Optimism FND, which is the Optimism Foundation. We're consolidating all the major public goods funding mechanisms, PGF, public good funding mechanisms from Gitcoin, Giveth, a few DAO drops, Retro PGF, a couple other Twitter handles here, and enabling perpetual donations to grantees directly from Twitter. Model adapted from Owaki, which is Kevin Owaki. And I'll just read one more of their tweets. Why a meta round? Donors are interested in supporting their favorite projects, regardless of whether these projects are part of a specific funding cycle. By involving grantees from diverse public good funding sources, we aim to foster cross-pollination and collaboration. Okay, so a lot of like buzzwords and Twitter handles and other words that may be new to people. So obviously Google them, look up this tweet. We'll have it in the show notes. Just highlight a couple things here. Basically, this organization, IDRIS or IDRIS, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, they're building web tools that make it easier to support your favorite causes on chain. So like these Web3 projects. I don't know, has MoonDAO ever done like a Gitcoin grant or anything? Or
We have actually, yeah.
Awesome. Very cool. So, all these organizations that are really helping fund really good Web3 projects. But it's a little bit hard sometimes if you want to make sure you're always supporting MoonDAO, for example. It looks like there's like 6 or 7 different grant projects that you have to visit on a regular basis to vote again or donate again to keep supporting them. And so this company, Idris, or this project, built a tool that makes it easier to make sure that you are supporting the projects you love on all these platforms on an ongoing basis. So there's a cool chart if you look up the tweet showing different organizations and arrows and stuff in terms of where they're helping money go. And it all ends up at public goods, which is cool. So any thoughts on this, Pablo?
Yeah, I mean, I like the whole public goods are good. It's like one of these things that is just, yeah, like we want to send money to open source projects that are just doing great things, and people should be able to give directly to those projects. And yeah, I think generally just all the experiments that are happening with public goods and regenerative finance, all that stuff is really interesting.
Yeah.
I like that people are like playing around with new incentive models and new stuff. And I feel like we're just gonna keep iterating on this and see what works, what doesn't work. And I love like seeing how quickly organizations like Gitcoin have iterated, taken in feedback, and or just doing some really cool stuff. And yeah, I'm here for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And by the way, the relevance to DAOs is first of all, this organization, IDRIS, is community owned and operated, and a lot of the recipients of the grant making goes to DAOs of various kinds. And finally, I guess just the cool Web3 angle is, if you had, let's say we're talking about 6 traditional grant making charities, nonprofits, whatever, and you wanted to always get grants from all of them, you're definitely going to have to always go pitch all of them on a regular basis. There's no, actually a common app would be a good idea. I don't know if anyone's doing that, but I don't know if there's no way to like combine them all into one composed, system. But because all of this in Web3 is happening on chain, I imagine that's what makes it possible to build a tool like this, is that everything's happening out in the open, on open source software, on blockchain protocols. And so you can take 6 and eventually hundreds of organizations that are trying to do great work and compose it all into this one better user interface in a way that just was never possible before Web3.
Totally. Yeah, that's something that I feel like isn't highlighted enough, is just the ability to compose on other people's smart contracts. Like the majority of like what MoonDAO has done has been built on top of other people's smart contracts. And it's actually the smart thing to do, because the ones that have already existed for a while have been battle tested. So it's like the the more use each of these contracts get, the more anti-fragile they become, the more other people can use
Yeah.
it, the more other people can compose on top of it. So it's like we all get stronger together. It's a
Yeah.
really awesome feature.
It is. Well, can you give an example of smart contracts that you have reused?
Yeah, totally. So we use a staking contract at MoonDAO, and we actually so we forked it from Nation Three, who forked it from Curve, and so it's
Oh
kind of
wow.
like this a bunch of different forks and little tweaks, and Nation Three tweaked it slightly, we tweaked it slightly too. But yeah, it's cool that just like an idea that was birthed from one DAO can just propagate all the way to us. So.
That's awesome. Love it. All right, let's turn away from the Just DAO It news report and onto our featured guest interview with Pablo. I'm going to skip the MyDAO ad because I did it earlier while we were waiting for your computer to restart. So let's just go right into it. So Pablo, let's just take one step back first, and would you tell us how you got into Web3 and DAOs in the first place?
Yeah. So I was working at Google as a software engineer, and this was during the pandemic. I became kind of very enthralled with this idea of community libraries. So how could you get people to share resources? As, we're all locked down, and what was kind of like an efficient way of doing that? And then I started kind of getting interested in smart contracts because it seemed like a way that people can kind of self-organize and do it without any sort of middlemen. You can kind of escrow and create a library in a sort of distributed way. And so it really started from like a problem first, and then it seemed like smart contracts were actually the correct solution. And from there, like a whole world opened up where I started to investigate and learn more about DAOs. And at the time I was working at Google, like the biggest quote unquote centralized tech
Yeah.
company. And I think it's like I think we're evolving as a human species to use the tools of the internet in a way that makes sense. And I think we've already had a bunch of experiments with like in power, and we've identified democracy as a pretty solid solution to dealing with sort of containing that power and making sure that that power is always responsive to the individuals that are being subject to that power. And we've been kind of moving into a world where networks are having more power even than nations. So
Mm.
a lot of these companies are much more powerful than a lot of nations around the world. And so I think it's kind of imperative that we figure out how to make sure that those companies are kind of in check with the rest of the world,
Hmm.
and we don't end up with some sort of tyrannical powers. And this is
Yeah.
especially
Mm.
so like if you look at the trajectory of AI and how powerful that's become. I think that's kind of we're getting two major revolutions in technology happening at the same time. You have AI, which
Mm.
is sort of the centralizing force, where you require massive data sets to
Mm.
train this intelligence, and then we're getting crypto, which is this way of kind of like of giving power to individuals and making sure that they can retain that power, that they have secrets that only they know, that make sure that they as individuals are protected within a system. And so, yeah, I mean, those are kind of like the high level
Mm.
narratives. And then that's just kind of like where I got really, really interested in sort of how DAOs could take shape. And I mean, it's still a very nascent technology, and I was just very excited to like help play with it, shape it, see where it grows, see how it goes, and
Wow.
then yeah, that's basically it.
Wow. Cool. Um, Oh, brought up so many interesting points. For some reason, my mind is sticking on the AI and wants to ask you a question about that for a second. But why do you say that that's a centralizing force? Like these big data sets, I mean, won't they eventually just get leaked and then everyone can use them? Or maybe we'll use DAOs to create the biggest decentralized data sets? Or what's the factor there that you're thinking about?
Well, yeah, I hope that we can use DAOs to kind of create these largest models in the world. But it's not only the data. I mean, the data is it takes a ton of time to, collect those data sets. But yeah, of course you can open source them. But the central issue is the compute. So the compute
Oh,
is
yeah.
very, very expensive, and it requires millions and millions of dollars to create these like massive clusters that people run to train these foundational models. So yeah, so there are only a few kind of labs and companies that can afford all of that and that are really on the bleeding edge of this. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Interesting. My friend who's a senator in the Marshall Islands that we work with on MoonDAO recently brought up kind of data centers for AI or compute centers for AI as another thing that they might want to think about. How can a sovereign nation help develop the future of data centers and compute for AI in a way that might be better for the world somehow? So I'm not sure exactly what the solution is, but I wonder if there's a way for a nation state to provide something that's more fair or more decentralized or less risky than relying on Amazon or Google or these new AI compute startups.
Yeah, I think something really interesting is that when it comes to crypto, the hardware that we're using is the same thing that they're using for AI,
Hmm.
GPUs. And so when people are mining crypto, um, what if some of that compute power was used also to train a model rather than kind of
Yeah.
solve this like one-way problem for
Hmm.
encryption? I don't know. Like I've heard some people like thinking about that stuff and working on that, but it seems like a pretty like there's probably something really interesting there. Like you have all this
Yeah.
compute, all these people working on problems all
Yeah.
day. Well, maybe they should be training these models, and that's the
Yeah,
way to
I also
do
find it's kind of philosophical, but it's interesting that the particular technology, these GPUs that have become so valuable in both crypto, like cryptography and blockchain, et cetera, and AI, are also the chips that were originally built just to create visual representations of the real world. Basically,
it.
virtual representations of the real world, right? And so there's something about crypto and AI that's very natural, right? I mean, you mentioned evolution earlier. Maybe it really is the evolution of life, of intelligence on Earth is happening partly through GPUs and these technologies.
Yeah, I mean, we could go real far out there. I mean,
That's true.
I think to some extent, we're kind of like birthing a new entity, and this is
Mm,
like it's silicon based rather than carbon based, but it displays a lot of characteristics of a living organism,
mm,
um, and
yeah.
it's pretty wild. Yeah, who knows where all this goes?
Yeah. All right.
For
Well,
I mean,
I'll take us back.
yeah.
I'll take us back to Web3 so we don't get too far off track. All right. So let's go back to your entry into crypto from Google and thinking about AI and crypto. How did you get from there into DAOs and specifically MoonDAO? Are you a former astronaut or how did this go down?
Well, yeah. So from this idea of like community libraries, I, we decided to turn it into a DAO, and we were doing a bunch of explorations into it. But it was kind of happening in like an isolated way. Like it was just me and some friends like tinkering on stuff. We had a bunch of demos that we'd share with our friends. I was living in the Mission in San Francisco and kind of sharing these things and seeing how people were using them. But really, the density for crypto wallets wasn't quite there yet. It was like 2020, and even today, I wouldn't say it's necessarily there at the level where like you could kind of plug this into some place like San Francisco, and like wallets aren't really ubiquitous yet. The UI isn't really there, but around that same time, ConstitutionDAO just kind of like sprung up on the internet, and I got really excited about this idea of like making like some like a statement that like the crypto network is just as powerful as any one of these billionaires that might want to, you know, purchase the U.S. Constitution, which is this like foundational document that's like enshrining the like powers of the individual, and just like massive leap in governance. And I see crypto as being this massive leap in governance, this massive leap in organization of individuals and protection of their rights. And so that was really exciting. And then I got involved in that, and we did end up losing. But it also, I think it was like a stress test of some of where the DAO technology was at the time. And we saw some of the creaks in there too, like the gas fees were really high. You're able to see what our max bid was, even though we pushed the max bid far beyond what anyone was anticipating. Like when the Constitution was going up for sale, people were estimating something like $10 million, maybe max 20 million is what this would go for, which and that was already extremely high. But we're thinking that would be the upper limit. But since we were able to raise it up to 40, almost $50 million, Ken Griffin, the CEO of Citadel, a hedge fund, had to put up a lot more money than he was going to. So in order to, you know, it was like it's kind of like Pokemon battles. You got your rivals, you know, and like we had grown to this level, and he beat us that time. But hey, maybe we'll beat him some next time.
It's remarkable. Do you remember how many people were part of ConstitutionDAO?
That's a good question. I don't know if I could tell you off the top of my head. I think I feel like we had almost over 10,000 people, but I could be wrong in that. You'd have to look up on Juicebox to be sure. But yeah, from there, like we had this idea of trying to send someone into space, and like we tried to apply the same thing to like, okay, internet movement, like these tickets to go to outer space are super expensive. You know, maybe we can all band together, buy a seat. It's pretty funny actually. Ken Griffin also then, after we bought Blue Origin seats, he also bought a Blue Origin seat.
Really?
He donated it, but yeah.
Nice.
I feel like we're like tracking each other now.
That's great. Interesting. Okay. And so what has the journey been with MoonDAO? Where did you guys start, and where are you now?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. So it's almost been 2 years now, and it's evolved a lot since its early days. So it started out just going, okay, this is how much one of these seats costs. If we all band together, we can buy one and then send, you know, someone from the internet up into space, regular person. We actually were able to buy 2 of them, and then we decided to vote with one of the seats and then do random sweepstakes with another one. But in the background of this sort of like awesome movement to send someone to space is what I think is a really powerful like collective of individuals from all over the world that are super interested in space, and we're like bringing in all of this diversity of thought and ideas, because crypto is totally international. I don't think like that is highlighted enough too, is that like it's not just the US, like it's a shared language. Like people from China are using this, and people from India, from South America, from Europe, from Africa. And so yeah, it's a pretty unique place. I think it's one of the most optimistic corners of the internet. It's a bunch of people that are, you know, tinkering with you know, like we get together and we just talk about what can we do to accelerate progress towards lunar settlement. And so a lot of the funding that we raise to send someone into space, that overflow is all being put into open source, public goods that accelerate our progress towards lunar settlement. So that's kind of like the I guess the amazing side effect of like trying to send someone into space, which is this like flashy, cool thing. It's an everyday person, but then also we have a community of nearly 12,000 token holders that can get together, submit proposals to fund different initiatives and things that progress this mission of like actually having boots on the ground on the moon, which sounds crazy, but it's also like this is on the roadmap for every major space agency in the world. And so you have this potential container that of like a bunch of different cultures and individuals that really want to get involved in this, that can use this incredibly neutral technology to fund and work on some of these problems in a way that's not arbitered by any one nation, but is just this neutral medium where people can collaborate and work together. So I think that's pretty powerful.
Wow. Yeah, it is. And what kinds of things are you funding so far to help drive towards that mission? Is it mostly just like normal Web3 public goods because those are where MoonDAO's needs are today? Or are there projects that are more directly tied to putting boots on the moon?
Yeah. So we do a bit of both. So we have a lot of projects that are just about like improving the efficiency of the community, making sure things are working properly. But then we also work on real technical problems towards lunar settlement. And one that I'd really like to highlight because I think it's just a really amazing project. We funded an individual. His name's Phil Linden. In collaboration with a nonprofit called Open Lunar to work on a timing protocol. And so the central question around that is, what time is it on the moon? Which seems kind of, it's this esoteric, what, like, is it, we could just say it's UTC, but it's also moving, right? So there's all of this, it gets kind of trippy when you really try to think about time and space. It's not so straightforward.
Yeah.
And it's also this fundamental piece of coordination that needs to happen.
Yeah.
And to, I guess, give a little bit more context. So if you're a satellite, right, and you're in cislunar space, so you're between the moon and the Earth, you really need to have a coordinated time with all of the other objects. And that's fundamental for what's called PNT, position, navigation, and timing. And all three of those are necessary. So what you have here on Earth is terrestrial GPS. So this was actually a DARPA-funded project, came from the United States military technology to basically figure out where objects are in space. And that was open sourced. So now everyone can use GPS and it's a public good. So all of our phones can plug into GPS. A million things use it in order to locate themselves in space. But this is also a huge undertaking, billions and billions of dollars. It also, billions of dollars to maintain. And it's a lot easier to solve that problem terrestrially than it is in cislunar space, where you have a lot less users of it. And it's just the topology of that space is much more complicated. So you might have things around the surface of the moon. You might have stuff that's in what's called some of the Lagrange points, which are kind of these like unique gravity wells that are located between the Earth and the moon. And so, yeah, it's a much more difficult problem. And so through this question of like, what time is it on the moon? We have sort of developed this, and actually the funny thing is that we we applied to DARPA with this proposal, because DARPA released this 10-year architecture program to create lunar infrastructure, and MoonDAO put together a proposal for it, which is kind of an alternative to a centralized version of doing GPS, to try to do a decentralized version. And it's quite interesting because if you have a bunch of nodes, so if every satellite had an atomic clock, and there are all these, there are open source time card. There's a project called the Open Source Time Card Project, and it's an open source timekeeping hardware. So you have an atomic clock and software for synchronization between these atomic clocks. And so the project itself is trying to decentralize PNT so that any satellite can take one of these time cards and then basically communicate with other satellites and determine where their location is in space. But it goes beyond just PNT. It also, this has major implications for communications technology, because once you have a network of all of these satellites that are relaying information, because PNT, all it is really is communication. You're constantly emitting what time it is and your position, in space. And so,
so you can send other data too, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so the fundamental thing here is that similar to like an app store. So if you have like a duopoly between Android and Apple, everything that's built on top of that app store has to be kind of within the bounds of those kind of centralized players. So I think we're looking at a potential kind of app store problem when it comes to space, where you have the US that's developing a bunch of infrastructure independent from China that's developing a bunch of infrastructure, and they're not necessarily interoperable. They're not necessarily working together. And both of them have massive infrastructure costs. So it's going to be like very difficult for just like smaller players to get involved. But if you can, at the most fundamental layer, which is the information layer and communications layer, develop protocols where individual satellites really have control over their position, navigation, and timing, then you can start to develop communications protocols on top of that. And then also that allows for decentralized applications to thrive. That might not necessarily be beholden by maybe some of these rules and regulations that US, China, or whoever puts together. You can create a neutral medium, a credibly neutral medium that anyone in the world can build on top of. So I think this is exciting.
Yeah, this is very exciting. So these are big problems, big, interesting challenges to go after. So I feel like for you to achieve your goals as a DAO, you're going to have to be very effective as a DAO. And I'm curious, because I get asked this question a lot. People say, what does it mean to be effective as a DAO? And well, I usually tell them it depends on your goals, right? And it sounds like you know what your goals are. So in your case, I mean, how do you facilitate MoonDAO being effective at achieving those goals?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think right now, DAOs in general are evolving. And right now, the way that most DAOs operate is through kind of like a relatively cumbersome governance layer. So like in order to move funds from like a main treasury over to a project or initiative, you have to go through kind of like this long governance cycle. And so I would probably try to frame the question in terms of speed and cycles of that governance and reasoning. And there's a lot of ways of kind of looking at that. So I'd say the most effective DAOs would be the ones where you can go from an idea to the funding and creation, and then sort of like all of that in a short period of time, and reason about that in a way that you're actually getting good results. So not just kind of throwing stuff at the wall or sort of chaos, but yeah. And so I think there's some really interesting new ways of kind of approaching that are less governance centric. So it's funny because DAOs kind of have this promise of being this sort of like decentralized technology, but a lot of the architectures that we're seeing right now in DAOs are actually relatively centralized. So, like for example, passing a proposal that requires a supermajority of the token holders in order to pass. Yes, the decision-making power is in the hands of a ton of people, but it has to go through this like one major governance node, in order for anything to happen. And so I think that, yeah, to me, the DAOs should have, an overarching mission that they all get aligned on, but the implementation towards that mission should have people should be able to attack it from different angles and not necessarily need to agree on the implementation. Because if you have the entire DAO voting on every single step of like how you guys are doing something, it's going to move incredibly slowly. It's just the decision making is going to be super diluted, because not everyone's going to have the same context inside of it. So I think that we're probably going to find this balance over time of like decentralization of power, like where it matters, but then the ability for people to kind of run with an idea and not be impeded by governance. So I think the most effective DAOs that work towards their goals are going to be the ones that are actually use governance less and use protocols more. And then have a governance layer, but that's the operating system. It's a slow layer, but then faster, kind of more protocol centric things on top of it.
Do you guys have a protocol in place that allows for that yet at MoonDAO? Some kind of process or structure, it sounds like, for allowing decisions to be made without always voting on it as a whole?
Yeah, we do. So we've got a project system, and that's evolved a lot over time. So right now we do allow people to kind of just go for it and do it, and then get incentivized retroactively. But there's sort of there's a sliding scale of who you're protecting within the system. So are you protecting the builders by guaranteeing their payment upfront? Or are you protecting kind of like the DAO at large, where you're incentivizing results? So maybe builders, they don't know how much they're going to get paid until they actually demonstrate the results. They have the proof of work. And so we're always kind of trying to play with that scale. And it seems like actually it's not just one system that works for that. I think that it's going to be a bunch of different structures that kind of fill in different niches. So I think projects work really well when you have a dedicated team, and it's something that the entire DAO kind of needs to agree on one implementation for. But something that we're moving towards now is a prize model, where it's here is a bounty for something that can get done, and whoever completes it first wins. And then we also have retroactive funding for here's go for an idea. It doesn't matter what the idea is. If you have strong belief in that idea and you just want to do it, go ahead and do it, and then show us the results, and then we'll reward you.
Wow.
Based off of that impact. So I think it's there's going to be a few different structures that need to be in place, a few kind of institutions to make sure that all of those different types of interactions work. Yeah.
So are you seeing success with retroactive funding? I guess while I can see the promise for it, it seems so counterintuitive from a traditional model of thinking, where it's if someone wants me to do something for them, I'm usually going to want to know, what am I going to get paid if I do it well? And the risk of not getting paid is so discouraging towards doing the work. I mean, how is that overcome? Is it a cultural thing where you build up trust within the system that if I do something awesome, I pretty much know I'm going to get funded? Or maybe there's a social layer where you kind of can validate it, even though it's not voted on chain yet, but you kind of know people probably will vote for it. I mean, how does that work?
Yeah. So we do two things at MoonDAO. So we we have what's called like a minimum viable payment. So like if you are for sure going to be dedicating some amount of energy and effort towards this project and you want to be guaranteed by the DAO that you're going to be paid some amount, then that does have to go through governance. It's a little slower. The DAO does have to agree to say, yes, we'll pay some amount. But at the very least, you're protected to some amount. And then there's retroactive on top of that. So like, and what I've found in general is that like the skepticism often comes from people that are new to the DAO that are like, oh, what the hell is this? Like, you guys aren't going to pay me? Like, it's like, no, we are. We just like have this system to allow for people to just kind of go for ideas, like just go ahead and do it and then show us. So it's like much more open and anyone can get involved. But yeah, I think that it takes some time to develop that trust. So what I've found is that people that have been inside of the DAO longer kind of tend to go for no MVP. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And I trust that this is a valuable concept and I don't need to go through this cumbersome like governance. But people that are new, it's much easier to go like, here's a project, here's how much you're going to get paid. And then, you know, if you go above and beyond, here's all this retroactive stuff. So like if you have new ideas along the way and you want to work on stuff, you can just add that in and you don't have to go through all this governance stuff.
So speaking of people, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's basically like what I found is like there's no one solution. You can't make everyone happy all the time. You just need to kind of offer a bunch of different tools and ways of interacting and like structuring that relationship. Like some people are more part-time, some people are more full-time, some people are much more trusting, other people are much more skeptical. And so, yeah, it's like, I think there's not just one solution that's like magic, boom, DAOs, it works, you know? Yeah.
So a lot of people bring up, speaking of new members, they bring up onboarding as one of the big challenges that DAOs have faced over the past couple of years. Is that a challenge for MoonDAO? Do you have a good solution for that? How do you guys think about onboarding?
Yeah, so especially in the context of we're sending a new person up to space. So we're doing a new sweepstakes in the next couple months. And we want to make it really easy for people to join the DAO. And there are a number of hurdles right now. So first one is pretty easy, is gas fees. It's expensive to acquire the tokens. We have staking also. It's expensive to stake the tokens. So we're moving a bunch of our stuff over to L2. That's number one. Number two, if you're new to Web3, getting a wallet and understanding like, oh, this is my wallet, this is how I have to fund it, this is moving tokens, all this stuff, that is also really difficult. Because you're sending people to different links, different websites. They have to go to MetaMask, download a wallet, then they have to open up a Coinbase account, whatever. It's difficult. So now with account abstraction, there are all these new solutions where you can generate people like all you have to do is sign up with an email or phone number. You can generate non-custodial wallets for them. That's huge. It's a massive UI improvement. And then on top of that, with account abstraction, you can pay for people's gas fees. You can batch transactions together. You can make that UI look a lot more like a Web 2 app than a Web 3 app. And it's still non-custodial. So like they still own those funds and they can, you know, also move them over to their own MetaMask eventually when they want to. But all of the transactions, all of that is handled by the user. So I think that all of that together is going to be a massive revolution in sort of like getting new people into the door. Because I think that is the biggest hurdle. It's just like, it's a super slow process to get people to just like wrap their heads around this technology. And there's no reason they should. Like, at the end of the day, this stuff should be like guarantees under the hood. But they shouldn't need to know, you know, public-private key encryption. You know, like you can't expect, you know, people to you know, figure all of that all out. All they should know is that this app is providing them with some unique capability that otherwise was not possible beforehand.
Yeah, I have a feeling, I guess I kind of hope that this is going to be a lot like the little lock icon in the browser address bar. That at first everyone had to be educated. Make sure you see the green lock before you put your credit card, and eventually it's like make sure you see the green lock anytime before you do anything on the web. And now it's just such a given that the browser will just tell you if there isn't that type of connection, but you're assuming that it is. You don't even think about it. I think it'll probably be similar with crypto. There will be a little green, I don't know what, the wallet looking thing in your browser bar. As long as you see that, you know you're dealing in a non-custodial way with the product. And then eventually it'll just be a given and the browser will just warn you if it's not. You know, hopefully it'll be that easy. But I'm curious to see if it will be that easy or if people are going to have to learn more about how cryptography works, for example, in order to use Web3 effectively.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you bring that like up that like we rely on those sort of like signals, where someone else is kind of like guaranteeing that hey, this protocol is safe or that this transaction is okay. And I think that this ties back to something that we were saying before, which is that like traditionally we rely on some of these like national institutions to do that for us. So like when it comes to health decisions, it's the FDA. And they figure out whether or not something is ready for the public or not ready. Mm-hmm. And I think that the beautiful thing about this sort of open source contracts are out on the web is that it allows for a ton of different organizations to specialize in sort of that like reputation, like as a service, so that like you can develop over time that hey, Adam's reputation company, and you do like investigation on protocols and determine whether or not one is trustworthy or not trustworthy. But that's not centralized to just like one government institution. Like you can have one, I can have one, and then over time, people will learn to trust, which organizations are really good at figuring out what protocols are safe, which ones aren't, and I think you'll have kind of like this. Lindy effect. So like these protocols that over time are tested and become anti-fragile, and we'll just learn which ones are kind of like the most reputable.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting point about like how licenses today are generally given by the government, whether it's the FDA or your doctor getting a license. Even I was talking to my hairdresser about how she has to get a license from the government to do that. And I said, what if there was a world where, we just trusted the salon wouldn't hire you unless they knew you were a good hairdresser? Why does the government have to be involved? And I think what's interesting is, we're so used to that because that's how it works today. And there's a good reason for that, which is that until the internet, at least, there was no other way to do it, right? There would be no way, because a hairdresser could just go town to town like a criminal, screwing up people's hair and then going to the next town and no one there would know because it happened in the other town. But now that we have the internet and we have cryptographic signatures, we would just make the person sign a transaction proving that they are who they say they are and that they have a million great reviews and they've never killed anyone with their scissors by accident or given a bad haircut too many times. And then you're good to go and you don't need the government to do it. So yeah, I think that is going to be really exciting. Let me ask you this. So, what are some of the, so you mentioned some of the technical kind of challenges for people joining the DAO, blockchain related challenges, right? Wallet, high gas costs, stuff like that. What about more from the human collaboration side? Do you guys use any tools that you'd recommend people check out, or just in general, what are the kind of primary tools that you use for people to collaborate? Is it Discord? Is it Notion? Is there any kind of more modern tool that you think people should check out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we use Discord for our just like we use it as a Slack basically, and then have a bunch of integrations. We use the Discord forums. Highly recommend using those. We used to use Discourse, which is like another forum website. But then we found that having it kind of like natively within Discord is a huge user experience improvement. We use GatherTown for co-working, and that's actually been a massive difference in sort of like the experience of working at a DAO, because working at DAOs can be pretty isolating. You're like working just your computer, you're like, it's kind of, you don't know who's around. But Gather Town is this great application. It's like you're in like a little Pokemon sort of environment, and you're walking around, and everyone has their little desk, and it's really fun actually. So we use that a lot. We use Coordinape to do retroactive payments. So each project within MoonDAO has its own Coordinape, and that's been pretty effective too. We use just Google Docs. We use a lot of Google Docs just for like, here's my proposal, leave comments, editing proposals, stuff like that. We're thinking about maybe integrating that into Obsidian. We started to use Obsidian, which is like it's like a way of networking a bunch of documents together. You get a visual representation of all your documents, and it's a cool app worth checking out too. What else do we use? Honestly, yeah, we try to minimize the number of things that we use, because we don't want a bunch of, like, there's so many cool tools out there, but then training everyone to use that tool and to jump on it, and then enforcing like, no, this is the place where that to-do list sits, and then no one uses it. It just becomes a headache. So we try to just use like the minimum number of tools.
Yeah. I've always kind of felt like if there's a good conversation happening somewhere that's not the place it's meant to happen, that's probably more a signal that there's a problem with where it's meant to happen or the structure. Because if people are naturally having these emergent, productive conversations somewhere, maybe that's where it should be had, or maybe it should be able to happen anywhere. So that's a great list of tools.
Yeah, something we've struggled with a lot, honestly, and like in theory, this is such a great idea, but like we haven't been able to get anything to stick, is like a tool where people just like list the work that they've done or something, and then like they attach that into like their project, and then people can rate their, you can see their contributions, all that. Like what we've ended up doing is just, we like once a week, everyone in the DAO that's like worked on something that week, they just post in one channel, and they're like, here, these are my like weekly updates. And we have like one meeting a week where the first 10 minutes of that meeting is like everyone writes their weekly updates. And we found that has stuck a little bit, because you're kind of like forced to do it a little bit. But otherwise, it's so hard to keep track of like what people are actually doing, and keeping people not accountable in like forcing people to do work or whatever, but more just like visibility. Like you just want to know what people are working on, and if someone's bottlenecked on something, like it's like all of these coordination problems that are a lot easier when you're in an office. You're just like having casual chat. But so we've tried.
Town looks. Sorry, what was that?
We've tried a bunch of stuff, but it's
that's cool. I'm gonna check out Obsidian, and Gather Town looks cool, even for our traditional company that's not a DAO, but looks interesting. We're getting close to the end of our time, so one more question, and then we'll turn to some closing stuff. What is your number one piece of advice for someone who's starting a DAO today? So they come to you and say, hey, I'm about to start my DAO. Like, what is the number one thing I should do or should avoid doing?
Yeah, it's always so hard to give general advice like that, because it's just like, it varies so much. But I don't want to give an unanswer either. So, I mean, I'd say it shares a lot of similarities with just starting any startup. So a lot of that applies. You want to have a group of individuals that start out that you really trust and you really get along with, you really like. Because I mean, you're gonna go on. It's like going on this like camping trip together, and things are gonna get. It might rain. It might be really fun. You might explore, see a bunch of cool stuff, but there's going to be hard times too. And so you want people that can kind of rough it with you to some degree, and having that support is really, really critical. So,
Yeah.
yeah, starting it with people you really enjoy, and just finding a problem that makes you really excited, something that makes you get up out of bed and makes you happy. And, you're like, wow, this is like, I'm doing like, I feel like, yeah, you really need that intrinsic motivation to some degree, because the extrinsic stuff isn't going to be there all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of people that came into DAOs like, "Whoa, wow, these crypto tokens are blowing up. I'm going to be
Yeah.
tomorrow." Well, hey, wake up call. Now most of them are, worth less than 10%, 5% what they were before. So,
Yep.
I think a lot of people, if you're getting involved with DAOs, it's a lot easier now than it was before.
Mm-hmm.
Not because,
Yeah.
okay, before you get a lot of interest, but it was fake interest.
Mm.
If we're being honest, a lot of it is just, hey, people are speculating on tokens. And but now the people that you're getting they know that, hey, the market isn't hot right now. This isn't like going to blow up tomorrow. But you're going to get people that are really interested in the mission, and that's worth its weight in gold. That's much more valuable. And people that are much more aligned with what you're doing. So it's a good time to get involved, and kind of build up towards that incoming wave of like, I think as the barriers come down, as onboarding gets easier, as we figure out all of this like coordination madness, we're really in the first inning of this technology, and I don't think it's going away. And I think DAOs are really just an extension on the LLC. It's an extension on all of these sort of like things that we've been doing since the dawn of humanity, which is just like working together, collaborating.
Right.
And it's a new way of doing it through the internet. So not going away.
100%. Yeah. And I have to say, because it occurred to me that when Moon has a totally different meaning in your DAO from other DAOs.
Yes.
Yes. I'm sure people want both. This has been awesome. Pablo, where can people find you and MoonDAO on the web or on social?
So you can find me at Pablo Moncada _ on Twitter. You can find MoonDAO. You go to moondao.com, click join us, and that walks you through everything to make it, really easy to get involved if you're interested in the sort of mission of becoming multiplanetary. One of the most exciting missions of our lifetime. We're living in like the renaissance of space exploration, and it's such an exciting time. For so many different reasons. For Starship, the sort of like renewal of space is just incredibly exciting. And I really need to mention too that we're doing a sweepstakes. So we bought a Blue Origin seat. We tried to give it away to our community. The person who won was from China, and unfortunately, after repeated attempts to get them into the United States, we weren't able to. So we tried to get them a visa over the period of a year, multiple times going to the visa office, massive packets, and we weren't able to get him. So now we're faced with the situation where, hey, well, we need to give this seat out, and we're running another sweepstakes. So actually, it's open to new people too. So you can join the DAO and get involved and have a chance of going to space. So that's going to be really exciting. We're just like, if you're joining now, we'll collect your interest and make sure you're the first to know when we launch these NFTs and get involved. And so that's really exciting, happening in basically by the end of the year, we're going to have someone selected in our community to go to outer space, and it could be you if you're listening. Just have to join MoonDAO. Tell us you're interested, and you'll be the first to know when we launch that.
So cool. Come for the space and stay for the technology, or stay for the space. Very exciting. For me, you can find me on Twitter or X at 0xThriller or The Thriller on Farcaster. My DAO is at mydao.org, midao.org, or MyDAO DS for directory services. Just a reminder, any lawyers in the audience, please reach out. We've got clients for you. We've got prospective clients for you, and also would love to tell you about our legal entities in the Marshall Islands. Again, Pablo, this has been really fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. It was fun.
Yep. Quick disclaimer: none of this has been or ever is legal advice. We're not lawyers. Obviously, not financial advice either. And for the audience, are you thinking about starting a DAO? Just DAO it.